This is the Jack's Diggin' Dude. Welcome to The Secret, a Treasure Hunt, Charleston. 40th Anniversary Solve. Here we go. It's widely accepted that Image 2, Verse 6 are associated with the beautiful and historic southern city of Charleston, South Carolina. The first part of this presentation will follow the baseline solve from the secret.pbworks.com image 2 verse 6 solution. The second half will be the corrections I made to that solve in all my original material. So let's go over the city clues that point us to the city of Charleston. If you look at the range of coordinates, you would expect to see in the image a 32, 33, 79, and 80. Well, there's an upside down 79 here in the lion's mane, and 80 over here, 32 jumbled over here, and a 33 right over here. On the mask, there's a image of the Charleston Peninsula with all the surrounding waterways and land masses. There is also a limb of the tree that is a good match for the highway that leads to the Pearman Bridge, which has been torn down and rebuilt. And of course, probably the most obvious clue is the depiction of Fort Sumter in the clock mask. And as you know, Fort Sumter is credited as being the place where the first shots of the American Civil War took place. Looking at the verse, the first 5 lines, of all the romance retold, men of tales and tunes, cruel and bold, seen here by eyes of old. The first couple lines of that verse are related to the dedication or preface of the book Treasure Island. The words tales and tunes and romance retold appear in that preface. Treasure Island was one of the first books to glorify pirates and buried treasure. A lot of the modern day imagery we have of what a pirate looks like or should look like came from the book Treasure Island. Also, the infamous pirate Blackbeard was known later in his life to roam around the waters of Charleston. So I think all this together is a good match for those first 5 lines. Going back to the verse for the lines, hearken to the words, freedom at the birth of a century. Well, to me, the line hearken to the words can only mean one thing, and that is, here comes the history lesson. And as you will see, there are quite a few lines in the verse that cover historical people or events that happened in the Charleston area. Freedom at the birth of a century is related to a gentleman named Telemaque who was born into slavery and in 1799 won $1,500 in a city lottery and was able to buy his freedom. His life took a tragic turn when he was convicted of plotting a slave revolt and subsequently hanged. In the verse again, the lines Edwin and Edwina named after him. Well, Edward Wilmot Blyden, who was an educator, writer, diplomat, and politician, and who resided in the Charleston area for a while, had twins named after him. I'm not sure if they were his children or someone else's that they named after him, but this all can be recounted in the book Abroad in America. So this is what I like to call the walkabout part of the solution. First, we need to determine a starting point. One of the clues in the image was in the clock on the mask. The hands of the clock have white points. So that directs us to White Point Gardens, which is at the southernmost part of the Charleston Peninsula. And in White Point Gardens, approximately in the center of it, there's a bandstand. And this bandstand is under a lot of trees. So if you were to stand in this bandstand, you would hear a lot of birds. If you look at the back at the image, and you'll see this later in the solution, that this mask here is a representation of the bandstand. And if you look at the lion, he has one extremely large extended ear that seems to be listening above the bandstand. So if you put all this together, I think it's a good match that we found our starting point, and stand and listen to the birds. If you walk north from the bandstand, you will come to the Hunley Monument. And this monument commemorates the marine engineer Horace Laughlin Hunley, who designed one of the first Confederate submarines. Unfortunately, the design was flawed, and it did have several accidents, including the one that took the life of Horace Hunley and some of his crew members. On this monument, you have fountains, trickling water on either side, and so this is a great match for the lines in the verse. Hear the cool, clear song of water. So if we make a right down South Battery Boulevard and continue our walkabout, we come to the Stede Bonnet Monument. And Stede Bonnet was the head of a pirate gang which was captured, and on November 8th, a lot of his gang was hanged in White Point Gardens. Stede Bonnet, the so-called gentleman pirate, was tried and later hanged himself in December of that same year. So all of this is a good match for the lines, or on the 8th scene where law defended. Continuing our walkabout and making a right down East Battery Road, we come to what used to be a capstan monument. And on that monument, it had a dedication plaque on the north side that had the date May 1913. This capstan does not exist here anymore and was replaced by a different statue, but it is a good match for the line in the verse, or May 1913. So this is where I diverge from the baseline solve. What follows is all my original material. So let's talk about the image and go over things that stood out to me. I split it up into two parts for better resolution. The upper part of the image is dominated by the lion's face. We talked about the coordinates hidden in the lion's mane. We talked about why the ear looks larger on one side than the other. There's also a birthmark in the lion's forehead. And most suspiciously, there's a horizontal stick here with what looks like a rope draped across it. In the bottom part of the image, we have a branch that traverses all the way across. We have a pear that looks very spherical to me. We have a long stem daisy. We have the hanging clock mask. We have the gemstone. We have what appears to be a little cross over here. And we have, of course, the fairy butterfly with a very distinct pattern in the wings and a depiction of an African American woman. As with my previous two solutions, there must be a key viewpoint from where a photo was taken that was used to create the image. So let's locate where exactly that key viewpoint is. The baseline solve left us at the capstan. And if we continue our walkabout going west down the center of the park, we come to a spot as depicted by the image on the right. And if you look closely, there is a ton of information right in front of you in this image. So let's go over what I see. So keeping an open mind, let's talk about what we see in the image. Well, the lion's head and face is a great match for the shape of a street lamp in White Point Gardens. The arches on the mask are a great match for those on the bandstand. And if you imagine you're standing in this image, and if you took a few steps to the left and maybe forward or backward, you can get the street lamp and the bandstand to line up the same way as they do with the lion's face and the mask in the image. The only difference is the Defenders of Moultrie statue is not in that view. You would expect it to be in between the lion's face and the mask at the top of the image. But we do have the fairy butterfly at the bottom of the image, and it actually is in the right position relative to the street lamp and the bandstand. And if you look at this branch that traverses the image, there is a branch, and it doesn't show up well on the top photo, but it actually, if you look at the bottom photo, traverses the whole backside of the Fort Moultrie statue. So something is telling me that we need to focus in on the fairy butterfly and determine exactly what is being shown here. Growing up in Southern California in the late 60s, for family trips, a lot of times we would hop in the car and go out to the desert and dig up rocks. And along the way, on many of the old highways, at the gas stations, or maybe on a roadside tourist spot, they would have a gem store. And the gem stores sold semi-precious polished rocks, quartz, geodes, maybe petrified wood. And one of my favorite semi-precious gemstones was jasper. And jasper comes in all different types of colors and patterns. But as soon as I saw the pattern on the butterfly's wings, it reminded me of a particular type of jasper called ocean jasper. This is a very important part to solving this puzzle, but in keeping with the genius of Byron Price and The Secret, you do not have to make this connection to solve the puzzle, and I'll show you why. So if we take a closer look at the Defenders of Fort Moultrie statue, the gentleman standing at the top of the monument is no other than Sergeant William Jasper. And this is why it's important to make that connection that the pattern in the fairy butterfly's wings is that of ocean jasper. But as I told you, you can also make the same connection by examining the position of Sergeant Jasper in the statue and that of the African American woman in the fairy butterfly. The hips, shoulders, and head tilt are all in the same position. And if you take the flag that Sergeant Jasper is holding and you mirror it and reposition it, you can almost imagine how his statue morphs into the fairy butterfly. So the fairy butterfly in the image is directing us to the William Jasper statue. So I believe we now have determined what the key viewpoint is, with the lamp being the lion's face, the bandstand being the mask, and the statue of William Jasper being the fairy butterfly. And if you take a few steps to the left and maybe back and forth, I'm sure you can get the same alignment as shown in the image, with the one difference being the fairy butterfly William Jasper statue being located here on the ground instead of on top of the monument. And you will see later why that becomes important. I think we're on the right track, so let's move on to determining the exact cask location. So now that we've determined our key viewpoint, which is located here on the map, approximately at the end of this arrow, and pretty much about where the pointer is in this lower left quadrant of White Point Garden, we come to the line between two arms extended. Well, the statue of William Jasper is right here. There's also a statue of the Confederate Defenders of Charleston, which is located here, right here in the image. And both of those statues have arms extended. But I kind of have a problem with that, because William Jasper statue, his arm seems more extended than raised. But if you go to the other statue, to me his arm looks more raised than extended. So I have a problem believing that these are the two arms extended. Another option is that The two arms extended refer to cannons that are located throughout White Point Gardens. These cannons here on the right image are along the road, the East Battery Road, approximately shown here. But again, I think I have a problem with that because you usually don't use the word extend when you're talking about arms or armaments. You usually will command raise your arms, aim your arms, but extend kind of has a telescoping connotation to it, and that's not commonly associated with firearms of any type. So I think there must be a better explanation for this line. But remember, the butterfly fairy is directing us to the Jasper statue. And at the base of the Jasper statue, you have 4 plaques. And the plaque on the north side, which is to the right, as viewed from the key viewpoint, depicts a lady with her arm extended. So I believe that these are the 2 arms extended as referenced in the verse. And between these 2 arms, we can draw brackets, one from the lady's arm on the right, and to be conservative, one from the wrist of the Jasper statue. And this will set bounds for between 2 arms extended. And these brackets go both into the page and out of the page all the way along the sand pathway. Going back to the verse, we have the line below the bar that binds. And this is a line that gives everybody a lot of grief. Well, in the image, it has the gemstone shown in the lower right hand corner. So if the treasure cask is located below the bar that binds, then what is shown here in the image and blown up on the right is a horizontal stick with a rope draped across it. So this must be an image of the bar that binds. On the back of the Jasper statue has a plaque depicting the battle to defend Fort Moultrie, with the soldiers manning cannons and firing at a battleship out at sea. And if you zoom in to the battleship, it has horizontal booms on the mast in which the sails are bound to, and it looks a lot like what is being shown here with the stick with a rope draped over it. So I believe that this is what is intended by the bar that binds. So now let's define what below the bar that binds means. And remember, on the back of the Jasper statue was the plaque of the soldiers defending Fort Moultrie. The image on the right has been mirrored, so if you were standing at the key viewpoint and looking through the statue, this is what you would see. So below the bar that binds would be represented by this shaded area here shown on the right. And if we extrapolate that down the path, it would be approximately as shown here, going in both directions all the way down the path. One other bit of information that verifies that this is indeed the bar that binds is that if you look at where the stick is referenced to this arch on the mask, it's almost identical to where the bar that binds on the plaque are in relationship to the arch on the bandstand. Returning to the verse for the line, beside the long palm shadow. Well, there's two obvious choices. One would be that they're referring to the palm on one of the various statues in White Point Gardens. I don't think this is a good solution because how do you determine what the so-called long palm is? Is it determined by the size of the statue or the size of the palm relative to the person? So I think there's a better explanation for this clue. And if you look at the south side of White Point Garden, you have tons of palm trees. And if you focus in on the area where we've determined the key viewpoint is, which is right about here, looking west, I think it's pretty obvious what the long palm is. So let's focus our attention to this palm tree shown right here. So here are a few more views of the long palm in question. Up here on the left, you can see it kind of in a drone view. Down here at the bottom, it's a view from in front of the Confederate Defenders of Charleston statue. And up here on the right is more in the area of our key viewpoint, looking from in front of the Jasper statue. So if we agree that beside the long palm shadow is now referring to a palm tree, let's determine the direction of that shadow. Well, some people think that you need to look at the time of day shown on the clock and match that up with the day of the year, and that will determine the location of the shadow. I think that there is probably a much simpler explanation than that. If you assume that the daisy in the image is representative of the long palm, and then if you look at the pear that is located suspiciously above the daisy and looks awfully spherical for a pear, you can see the different varieties of pears, probably closest to a Bartlett pear, but it looks a lot more spherical than a pear should. So let's assume that it is representing the sun, and if you're in the northern hemisphere above the Tropic of Cancer, which Charleston is, the sun will always appear in the southern sky. So two possibilities I get from the image, either that when looking at the long palm, you assume the sun's right behind it and the shadow is pointing directly at you, or the other possibility is that the sun is shown in the southern sky and that the shadow of the long palm is pointing directly north. If you look on the lower right image, and it's really hard to draw here because of lens distortion, but if the shadow was pointing directly north, it would point in approximately this direction here. And I don't think under any conditions that the shadow of this tree actually reaches the pathway, and thus the line beside the long palm's shadow. Returning to the verse for the line, White House close at hand, just north of the area that we've been looking at in White Point Garden is a house that looks almost exactly like the White House in Washington. And if you draw a line from the Long Palm in the direction due north of the Long Palm shadow, it takes you almost exactly to the front porch of the White House. So I think this clue, White House close at hand, establishes the second direction line that we need to locate the cask. Here's another view of that second line. You can see that we are looking directly north in this view, although we're probably a couple steps to the right of the palm tree. So if you imagine you're a couple steps more to the left and you are looking directly north, you can see the White House in the background, and you can see that this line almost lines up directly with the front porch of the White House. The other thing to note is there's a couple rows of trees on either side of the path, and this line appears to go between the first and second set of trees, maybe a little closer to this row of trees on the left. And if you draw that secondary line from the Long Palm to the porch of the White House, it indeed crosses the path in front of the Jasper statue. That path is made of sand. It's pretty compacted these days, but if we go to the verse, embedded in the sand waits the fair remuneration. And that leads me to believe that the cask is buried here at the intersection of the line below the bar that binds with the line that connects the Long Palm with the porch of the White House. Approximately shown here on the map and on this image in the lower right, showing the line going directly north from the Palm to the White House, and then the sight line below the bar that binds along the key viewpoint. Boom. Solved. That's 3. Trifecta. Hat trick. Yay me. And if all these way lines and viewpoints and intersections are confusing you, I have come up with a very simple way of locating the cask. First, stand in front of the Jasper statue so that you are positioned below the bar that binds. Take a few steps backwards until when you look over your left shoulder, you see the Long Palm, and when you look over your right shoulder, you see the White House. Extend your left arm so that your hand is beside the Long Palm shadow, and extend your right arm so that the White House is close at hand. Look upward at the sky and thank Byron for the genius of the secret and all the joy that he has brought so many people for so many years. And now look down between 2 arms extended below your feet as embedded in the sand waits the fair remuneration. In other words, you are currently now standing directly over the cask. I hope you agree that this is the correct solution to the Charleston puzzle. Please, no probing or digging without proper permission. This has been my final 40th anniversary solve. Stay tuned for my first 50th anniversary solve. Until then, this has been the Jack's Diggin' Dude. Happy hunting.